Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're looking at one of the absolute most legendary networks in human history, the Silk Road. But right off the bat, I need you to completely erase that mental image of a simple paved highway running seamlessly from point A to point B. Okay, let's dive into this, because the myth of the Silk Road is way simpler than the incredibly complex reality of how this whole network actually functioned, and honestly, the massive global domino effect it eventually set into motion. So before we get into the actual mechanics of how the road worked, let me ask you this. How do you think the world's most famous trade route actually started? You'd logically assume, right, that it was born out of some grand economic summit, or maybe it was some wealthy merchant's master plan to sell luxury fabrics to the world. But no, it didn't start with silk at all. It started with horses. Back in the 2nd century BC, specifically around 138 BC, the Han Dynasty Emperor Wu had a major problem on his hands. He was dealing with these constant, reoccurring conflicts with the northern and western Xiongnu tribes. So he sends an envoy named Zhang Qian out west, literally just to try and form an alliance. Well, what Zhang Qian found on that trip ended up fundamentally changing human history. On his journey, Zhang Qian runs into the Dayan people, and he is just absolutely mesmerized by their horses. The Han Dynasty had already been using standard Chinese breeds for centuries at this point, but these Dayan horses, they were a completely different beast. I mean, they were larger, they were stronger, and they were incredibly fast, just vastly superior to the standard breeds. Emperor Wu realizes immediately that this kind of horsepower could completely solve his Xiongnu threat. So he buys up these Western horses, successfully deals with his border crisis, and suddenly realizes that connecting with the West is incredibly beneficial. And because of this one accidental discovery, Emperor Wu officially triggered the opening of the Silk Road in 130 BC. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer mind-boggling scale of what was just created. 4,000 miles. That is the massive distance this new network of trade routes stretched, reaching all the way from the Han in China, straight across Central Asia, right up to the very tips of Europe. Which brings us to Section 2, the Persian Blueprint, the origin of the global highway. Now, here's a surprising fact. Roughly 300 years before the Han Dynasty opened the Silk Road, the Persian Empire under Darius I had already created the original international trade route. Known as the Royal Road, it spanned an impressive 2,000 miles. It stretched all the way from Susa in modern-day Iran, straight west to Sardis in modern-day Turkey, with these smaller auxiliary routes kind of branching down into northern Africa and the Indian subcontinent. And here is just a fantastic piece of trivia about that 2,000-mile Persian Royal Road. The Persians used this route heavily for an incredibly efficient messenger system. It was so good that the ancient Greek historian Herodotus was basically amazed by these couriers, writing extensively about their absolute reliability through snow, rain, and heat. Well, centuries later, those very writings about ancient Persian messengers formed the basis for the modern United States Postal Service creed. Really not bad for a dirt road built centuries before Christ, right? Moving on to Section 3, Middlemen and Undercover Monks, the real ecosystem of trade. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how it completely debunks what we thought we knew. Yeah, it is time to burst a very common historical bubble regarding the merchants of this era. We always tend to imagine this brave, lone merchant, right, loading up a camel in China and personally walking that entire 4,000-mile stretch to Europe. In reality, that almost never happened. The Silk Road operated much more like a massive continental relay race. A trader would go a short distance, sell their goods to another merchant at a markup, and then just head back home. Then that next merchant would do the exact same thing. This endless chain of short-distance handoffs created a booming ecosystem of middlemen. And you know how it goes. Wherever there are middlemen, entire new businesses pop up. Inns and resting places for caravans began dotting the routes, and of course, on the less legal side of the ecosystem, frequent robbers became a very common, very dangerous occupational hazard for anyone carrying cargo. So let's talk about the specific cargo that actually gave the road its name and the massive economic headaches it caused. The Romans over in the far west developed an absolute obsession with Chinese silk. But here was the catch. China strategically hid the secret of harvesting silk from silkworm cocoons, which gave them a total airtight global monopoly. The demand in Rome was so astronomically high that it created an unfavorable balance of trade. Essentially, Rome was bleeding its wealth dry, just sending massive amounts of money east to pay for this one imported luxury. Now, the Western Roman Empire actually fell before they could ever fix this economic drain, but the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, decided to take matters into their own hands. This is a wild, completely true story of ancient corporate espionage. Emperor Justinian actually hired 2 men and sent them deep into China, totally undercover as monks. Their sole mission? To steal living silkworms and smuggle them out of the country. And amazingly, it actually worked. They brought the worms back to Byzantium, started a brand new production stream of silk, and finally saved their empire from that devastating trade deficit. Just wild. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, Trading Ideas and Plagues, how the East and West collided. Because when East and West collided, the exchange went so far beyond simple economics and silk. There was a massive variety of goods moving across these borders. Moving from east to west, yeah, we see teas, dyes, spices, porcelain, and medicine. But crucially, we see paper and gunpowder, 2 literal game changers that would fundamentally rewrite the contemporary European world, completely transforming warfare and becoming the primary canvas for human knowledge. In return, moving west to east, merchants traded glassware, animal furs, foods like honey, live animals, beautiful rugs, and armor. So the crucial point is that this incredible cross-cultural collision passed along entirely new ways of thinking, new ideologies, and new religions across the globe. Now, earlier I mentioned that merchants almost never traveled the entire 4,000 miles, right? It was almost always a chain of middlemen. But there is an ultimate exception, and you definitely know his name, Marco Polo. In 1275 AD, at just 17 years old, Marco Polo, traveling alongside his father, successfully traversed the entire overland length of the Silk Road, ultimately reaching the Chinese court of Kublai Khan. And the Polos didn't just turn around and go right back home. They stayed in Asia for years, where young Marco encountered people, cultures, and technologies he quite frankly never could have imagined. When he finally returned home to Venice via the Silk Road in 1295, he documented everything. He brought back this vast, incredible knowledge and shared it all with the European world in his famous book. His writings literally blew Europe's mind, dramatically opening their eyes to Eastern language, culture, and this sense of boundless discovery. But, as we know, being this globally interconnected had a very devastating dark side. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for silk, spices, and brilliant ideas. It was also an absolute fast track for pathogens. Many historians point directly to the Silk Road network as the likely primary culprit for the rapid spread of the catastrophic Black Death in the 14th century. So, the very same trade routes that brought unparalleled prosperity and connection also brought unimaginable tragedy to millions of people. Let's move to our final section and see how this all builds to a climax. Section 5, sparking the Age of Discovery, the end of the road. Following this timeline perfectly illustrates the ultimate historical domino effect we've been talking about. First, we have Marco Polo returning in 1295, right? Which gives Europeans this insatiable appetite for the incredible wealth and culture of the East. Then, the 14th century brings the tragic spread of the Black Death. But the network itself only survived a little bit longer after that. The final fatal blow came when the Ottoman Empire conquered Byzantium. The Ottomans almost entirely cut off trade with the West, completely shutting down the Silk Road. Just like that, Europe was blocked from the Eastern goods they now deeply, deeply relied on. They desperately needed a new way around this massive land blockade. And really, their only remaining option was to look to the oceans. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely remarkable question to ponder. How did a blocked dirt road in Asia shape the very countries we live in today? Well, because when the Ottomans closed the Silk Road, it forced desperate Europeans to explore the seas instead, officially kicking off the Age of Discovery. That sudden necessity directly led to the eventual European expeditions to the New World. The intense craving for global trade and connection, which was fostered by a 4,000-mile overland route, is exactly what pushed ships across the Atlantic. The Silk Road didn't just connect the ancient world. Its dramatic closure quite literally forged the modern globe as we know it today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this helped piece together the incredible puzzle of our past. Keep learning, and I will see